But when it comes to using data for decision making in games, this is not just a hockey conversation.
Right.
This is across all sports right now. Where do you fall in that conversation?
So hockey's interesting, right? Because since football, baseball is stop-start,
Yep.
it's a lot easier to say, what do I do based on this specific situation?
Yep.
And you're basically playing the odds, is what you're doing. And my husband used to be a bigger baseball fan. He's less now, but he doesn't like what analytics has done to baseball just because it slowed down the pace,
Yep.
he feels, and taken out some of the dynamicism of it. But hockey, you can't do that. You can't stop, start, and make a split-second decision per se, but it can inform strategies, how you play something like pulling the goaltender.
Yep.
That's based on analytics. And first and foremost, a coach just saying this makes sense, which I think is if you just look at the numbers only, I think you're selling yourself short. No matter the sport, you always have to consider the situation, the personnel, the tone, the moment. It's part of the puzzle that helps you make the right decision. That's what I think.
So the conversations you have with coaches, do they dive even deeper into the numbers with you?
So not all coaches want to be deep into the analytics, right? But what's funny is 9 times out of 10, what the analytics are going to reveal to you is something that a coach usually already thinks about. And so that's part of what I do in data-driven storytelling is I'm not going to come up to you and say, Jen, this number is this, and this number is this, and do you think this? What I'm going to say is, I noticed that this player was doing this thing, and that resulted in this. Does it matter? And then you get an answer. Sometimes it's no, and that's when it's really interesting.
So I envision that you have a bazillion spreadsheets on your computer.
Yeah. And some databases.
And you like this? Look at her face. She totally likes this. I'm like, this sounds like the worst part of storytelling to me. I appreciate her storytelling style, but...
Well, for me, right, it's about how my brain thinks. And for me, it's always about, I want to know why. It doesn't mean I have to explain it to everyone, but understanding the why helps me inform others or educate others, particularly here, since we're bringing the Kraken. We've had hockey here for a long time, but now we have NHL hockey, so hopefully we're growing a bigger fan base. So if I understand the why, once I've got the kernel of the why, I can, and you have this gift too, you know the core message that you want to communicate, and then you can translate that based on your audience, based on how many people you're talking to, are you online, are you in front of a group? So it's the same kind of idea. When I have the why, I fully understand the idea, so then I can present it.
So you started putting data and numbers into stories so that people knew that you knew what you were talking about.
Correct.
Right? Did it end up working the way you thought it would?
I think it did. It got me writing more, and because it tied into the time that analytics were kind of hitting hockey, and I was passionate about that, when I started, I was by no means one of the first, but I was doing something different, and I was a woman, and so I was one of some voices that started to come up, and I was very lucky. It would take me an hour to recite the names of all the people who helped me along the way.
I often get asked how hard it is to be a woman in sports. And I've had this conversation a number of times. I think I appreciate the question in a different way now, but I never thought about it that way because you're just hustling and you're just working hard, and it's hard for anybody to be successful. I think now it bothers me more because for as much progress as we've made, and there's a lot, and I work with awesome people, there are still days where I'm like,
seriously?
Are you serious?
Yeah. And I want to say too, like hockey, it comes from Canada. It's a lot of white men who have historically played the sport. No one was trying to be exclusionary, but that's its roots.
Yes.
So I really appreciate that the Kraken are looking at hockey differently and trying to make our staff look like the community that we live in. But I'm with you. I think. Plus, we were young and foolish, right? We're like,
you don't know what you don't know,
we're
right?
like, we can do this. We're going to
figure it out. Yeah.
And it's not until, I think even more so now because we have done a lot and we know what we can do well, that when someone reacts negatively to something that you know you did well, you're like, what was that?
Yeah.
So there's work to do for sure.
But it is really cool to be in the space. And it's really cool when people come up and say that they've been watching for a long time, right? Even though it makes me feel old.
But time doesn't, we stay the same age.
We
forever.
stay the same. Thanks to our hair and makeup, we stay exactly the same age. And so what, is it all hockey on the podcast? Do we only talk about hockey penalties? What's happening there?
So it's all hockey. We try and talk about all hockey, which means NHL, international hockey, women's hockey, because women play hockey as well. They have their own league. They have phenomenal programs at many colleges. And we just try and keep it real and talk about what we're excited about in the game of hockey, but also we really try and shine a light on when the business we're in needs to be better so that more people like us can be in the industry.
So how do you find the sweet spot in that? Because I will say, for as long as I've been in the industry, and I feel confident with what I know, I have a lot of self-doubt over when it's appropriate.
Totally.
To say something that might be against the norm or that might rock the boat. And part of that is, when I got into the industry, the advice that I was given was, don't be seen, don't speak up, make sure people don't know that you're in the room, because if they figure out that you're a woman doing sports, they will kick you out. And I can't, 25 years later, I can't shake that.
Yeah.
And it's a real, like I go back and forth on the responsibility versus like not being that person.
Yeah, and I think for the three of us, so there's three of us on our podcast. It's me, Sarah Sivian, Shayna Goldman, two of the most incredible, talented communicators, writers, journalists I've had the privilege to know. And funny as all get out, so witty. I think we have each had to fight and claw so much that we've had to have backup plans.
Yes.
So
100%.
So we're a little bit more willing to take risks because, as we just talked about, when you see inequalities now, and that's not just for women, it's really stark. And I will never do anything to embarrass my employer because I have actual channels through which I can talk to them if I'm concerned about something, and they will always listen. But I think it's about also, a lot of people don't see them because they're not used to understanding what inequality feels like. And so it's about shining a light on that too. We're not here to burn people, right? We're not here to shame people and destroy them. We're here to elevate the conversation so that we all hold each other accountable at the end of the day so that we can be better, so that bad things don't continue to happen. So that's our motivation, even if we're a little snarky in the way.
Isn't that sometimes the best way to communicate what's happening?
Yes.
Though?
Yes.
There is a bit of snark. How much time on the podcast is dedicated to Taylor Swift?
Well, so this is a big controversy.
Oh boy.
Because, listen, Sarah and I have seen the light. We are dedicated Swifties. Sarah got to see the very last show in Vancouver. I'm so happy for her. But Shayna has not yet seen the light.
So in general about Taylor?
No, she kind of appreciates her, but she doesn't. She needs to fully embrace it. So we're working on it. But we do bring Taylor in. We bring our passions in. And I think that's what's fun for us too. You know, the Kraken just hired the first ever female full-time assistant coach in the league history. And you see the power of that. You see so many little girls and so many moms saying, look at this.
Yep.
And when I was little and I went to sporting events, the only women you saw were women who were cheerleaders.
Yep.
Or were maybe working concession or merchandise stands.
Yeah.
And those are, if you want to do that, I think that's awesome. But there were no other opportunities.
Right.
And so on our podcast, we will talk about who we are too, because hopefully people see that we are fully formed people. We're not just this propped up perfect story. And
She's
we are
pretty
women in
close to
sports.
perfect though.
What's that?
You're pretty close to perfect.
No, I have lots of flaws. I have people who can tell you the list.
We don't need. That's not a list we're interested in. That's not what's happening there.
Maybe a little S&P?
Yes. All of a sudden we were talking in code and I wasn't sure what was happening there.
I had chef once always said S&P, and I'm like, what are we talking about? And then I was like, salt and pepper.
Because it's so hard to say salt and pepper.
Oh, listen.
I know. You're in a kitchen. There's a lot going on.
When you're in television, there are so many acronyms and words. I'm still learning them.
I feel like that in every industry, though.
It was so true.
And I feel like every time I go to give a corporate presentation and they hit me with an acronym, I want to say, yeah, but do you know what QBR is? And do you know?
No, that's literally.
Do you know what batting average is and WAR and WRC plus?
But this is in all seriousness part of why I started writing the way I do, is because language can be prohibitive.
Yeah.
It can be a barrier. And I used to be a consultant, and that's one of the first things I would do is I would say, give me your dictionary of terms and your acronyms. And if you don't have it, when you hire someone, you're setting them up for failure.
That's a good point.
So that's a lot of why I try and put things in common language so that you don't have to know what QBR is and what WAR is. You just know that this is something that tells you how good a player is.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But S&P is probably not going to go into my...
After I use an acronym myself.
I Cook, You Measure is presented by Safeway, who welcomes everyone at the table through the Nourishing Neighbors program. You can donate in stores or by visiting nourishingneighbors.com.